Good evening, Amanda.
Good evening, or good afternoon, good morning.
I meant that too.
She watched me on my video about organizing.
Good morning. First, can you hear me? All right, good, thank you. Please be advised that the Board of Trustees are participating in this regular board meeting June 9, 2021, in person and with teleconferencing. The meeting is being recorded and all actions will be taken by a roll call vote. As noted on the agenda, anyone wishing to observe the meeting may do so via AVUHSD YouTube channel. If you are participating remotely, you will be permitted to share your comment by phone. Speakers will be placed on hold until it is their time to provide their comment to the board. Once the speaker is done, or the 3-minute speaker and or the 20-minute agenda item time allotment is met, they will be disconnected from the call. Speakers may continue to observe the meeting on the YouTube channel. If you wish to make a comment in person, you will need to complete a speaker card and give it to staff, the board secretary, wear a face covering, adhere to any physical distancing protocol, and complete a brief COVID-19 screening, which includes having your temperature taken upon entering the room. We ask that you only stay at the meeting to provide your comments unless space is provided or is available, excuse me. Space will be limited due to physical distancing and on a first come, first served basis. In-person comments will go first. Submissions must comply with a 3-minute time limit. A total time for public input on each agenda item will be limited to 20 minutes. Speakers are cautioned that under California law, no person is immune from liability for making intentionally false or defamatory comments regarding any person simply because those comments are made at a public meeting. Comments received shall become part of the official record. I would like to ask board members to respond to the following questions as I call your name. Are you able to hear our proceedings on your end? Ms. Perrell?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes. Dr. Ruffin?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Ms. Nguyen?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Rush? Yes. Mrs. McGrady? Yes. Okay. Ms. Rush, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
forward in our agenda, we are at number 2 on the recognition reports, public comments for school safety. Mr. Neal.
Good morning, Board and Cabinet. Right now, we'll take a brief moment to introduce our first speaker, Dr. John Eiler. Our district has partnered with Dr. Eiler at Collaborative Learning Solutions over the past few years. Dr. Eiler and his team have provided technical assistance with addressing disproportionality relative to suspensions, expulsions, and school climate. They have also provided guidance and training in developing our district-wide multi-tiered systems of support framework. Dr. Eiler is a California Department of Education approved technical assistance provider who works with a number of urban school districts nationwide. Brett?
Sure. And good morning, Greg and fellow board members. And once again, it is my pleasure to have John Eiler here of Collaborative Learning Solutions with us this morning. And as Shannon mentioned, we worked with John on a number of occasions, and his work, along with Collaborative Learning Solutions, focuses on data, behavior, social and emotional wellness, restorative practices, equity, and the integration system change. So a number of weeks ago, John and his team were brought on to conduct a research study regarding school safety, as well as the topic of school resource officers, or SROs. The study has been completed, and John is here this morning to present the findings. So John, I'm going to turn it over to you and introduce any of your staff that you have with you.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
We've got that perfect. I've got Dr. Paul Luomo on this morning, and so I can't see him right now, but I know you're in the space, Paul, and if you're there, I'd encourage you to turn the video feed on. And Paul and I are going to spend the next, great, thank you. We're going to spend the next 20 or so minutes with you, just kind of walking through the results of this study, and also giving some time for some thoughts and some considerations, and also some questions and answers that you might have. I want to begin by saying, number one, thank you for the opportunity to partner with you in this journey. This is something that we are extremely passionate about as an organization. When you look at the mission or the core of who we are, it's really about serving populations and communities that are in the margins. And so this is definitely an area of interest for us, and we appreciate the confidence you've placed in us to be a voice of your community and to share that back and reflect that back with you in a way that's most impartial and unbiased. I appreciate the introduction and some of the experiences, if you will. I wanted to call out just a couple because I want you to understand that we leverage some of the experiences we've had and bring that to you as something that will help make an informed decision, help you make an informed decision about this topic. I think it was mentioned I currently serve as a technical assistance provider for California. Paul is in the same boat. We both work with districts throughout California to resolve issues of disparity and disproportionality. I've worked with many high school districts across our state, 3 specifically, who are involved in litigation regarding disparities in education. And so we help to settle those and also implement strategies to curb that and to change that trajectory. I've worked with attorneys across the nation in the Office of Civil Rights to address strategies, help them address strategies with districts in mitigating disparities. I've done routine consultation with both CDE and CCEE, specifically in areas of equity and more specifically in the areas of reducing disproportionality. The other thing I think is important to mention, we have a partnership with Keenan and Associates, which is one of the larger firms in California that is a prominent provider of insurance solutions for LEAs. And we have partnered with them to conduct school safety audits. So they tend to have a view of looking at kind of the physical plant, if you will, and protocols that are in place around school safety. We partnered with them to look at more of the school climate protective factors, if you will, or preventative strategies. So together, we're offering an audit to school systems to look at both culture climate prevention and also physical plant prevention as well. So I share these with you simply to give some confidence and some credence in my credentials and our credentials as an organization. I also don't claim to be an expert in this space, rather a critical thought partner with you. And so I'm able to leverage some of those experiences with you. I respect and I acknowledge the decision you have in front of you as a board of trustees. And I want to be able to give you everything that you possibly need to make the best decision for students you serve. we back up just a minute, I'm going to just very briefly review the purpose of the study and the strategy. We're asked to engage a strategy with your team to really just collect perspectives of various members of your community regarding the involvement of SROs on campus. That was number one. And number two, to capture factors that people felt contribute to safety on campus. So there were kind of two primary goals of this study, if you will. There was a three-pronged approach that we utilized. One was a quantitative piece, and we constructed a survey for various groups. And the goal there was to really have this wide reach. We wanted to capture as many voices and perspectives as we possibly could through an easy way to capture that. And so I believe Paul's going to share some of the numbers. We had a very good response rate with thousands of participants of your community responding. We also ran a strategy two, if you will, was a qualitative component, which was running focus groups. And so we wanted to understand kind of the narratives and the stories and kind of the personal experiences, if you will, regarding this topic of school safety and involvement of SROs. And then the third strategy was with the stakeholder team that your district leadership had put together to begin addressing this. And that was to conduct listening circles. And we really just wanted to hear kind of the story, the personal narratives, without kind of this research lens that was going to be applied to it, where we're applying a coding strategy and looking for patterns and themes. It was simply just, what are the personal narratives around this particular topic? Paul, in just a minute, is going to go through the report that he's put together. Before we do that, I want to just give kind of some key points from the research, what we know about school safety and SROs. Number one, SROs kind of emerged out of the 1990s. This is in the face of increased school violence at the time. It's also within the context of zero tolerance. This is where we saw a lot of these policing policies and discipline policies that were very much embedded in this notion of zero tolerance. Found it interesting in 1718, on a national perspective, about 45% of all public schools reporting having one or more SRO present at least one time a week. I also found it interesting that during that same year, 60% of schools did not have any mental health services. And when you look at the research around this, it's when you look at school safety, mental health is definitely a component. It's a protective factor, having systems and structures in place. And so I kind of put those two up together within the same year and just find that interesting. In recent years, particularly with the killing of George Floyd, nearly a year ago, there's been increasing concern regarding the presence of law enforcement, just not only in society in general, but also within schools. Specifically, the research mentions concerns around criminalizing of student misbehavior, racial ethnic disparities that continue to persist, not only in discipline events, but also in arrests within school systems, and also the school to prison pipeline in terms of training kind of this criminality or this mentality of criminality kids at an early age. Those are kind of some of the key points from research that that we know are emerging. Some other pieces that I want to share with you before Paul gets into this. What we do know that as a general statement, this is fairly new. There isn't a whole lot of rigorous causal research that would point to the presence of SROs creating safety on campus. In fact, I think there's more evidence that sometimes points to the negative effects of that with regard to racial disparities. SROs, I think part of that is when you look at SROs, it's bringing this law enforcement and policing strategy and layering that onto a school campus. And so there's little definition in terms of roles and responsibilities of SROs, but just law enforcement on campus tends to not necessarily lead to, quote, improved safety overall as a general statement. What the research has pointed to is that there is a reduction of severe or extreme behaviors such as rape, battery, use of weapons on campus, and assaults. So there is some evidence that points to that in terms of reduction. In terms of overall school safety, some of the less extreme behaviors, that there isn't kind of a demonstration, if you will, that if SROs are involved, if we see a reduction in those other particular areas. Many studies have actually demonstrated an increase in reported crime, non-serious crime, with the presence of law enforcement. There are some studies that have identified significant discrepancies, particularly of students of color, and I think that's a very real consideration as we kind of move into this decision that is in front of you. Not only students of color, particularly Black males, being referred to law enforcement, but it also reflects a national trend around office discipline referrals. With regard to impact on school climate, there's not a whole lot of research here. There's a 2016 study that I referenced out of the University of Tennessee that did report feelings of safety increase with the presence of SROs. And I think you'll see that reflected in some of the results from the study here is that kids who hadn't experienced with an SRO tended to want to see an SRO on campus more so than kids that did not have an experience with that. And then just a couple other pieces I wanted to add before Paul gets into it here in just a minute. There are a variety of different models across the nation that the research points to as promising models, if you will. Clayton County, Georgia, Broward County in Florida, and then Denver, Colorado have taken a different approach, if you will, in terms of the utilization of SROs for law enforcement on campus. So there's some promising practices that are coming from that research, and it really points to the embedding of law enforcement within culture climate initiatives and utilizing them in a way that's proactive and creates protective factors around campus. School-based mental health providers have definitely been demonstrated to improve school climate and safety. So when you're looking at safety considerations in your district, that would be a consideration I would encourage you to take a look at, not just the involvement of law enforcement, but the interface of law enforcement and mental health providers. And then also restorative discipline approaches have been demonstrated through the research to reduce disciplinary incidents and create a greater atmosphere of safety on campuses. So that's yes.
I'm not sure if you have your presentation up yet, or if you want to put your presentation up yet or not.
No, what I want to do is just give some talking points in terms of this is what we understand from the research, so that there's, as you look at the results from your community, there's kind of some context to embed that in terms of what we see nationally around this particular topic.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So what I would like to do now, though, is turn this over to Paul. And Paul, I believe you're planning to screen share and then walk through some of the results of the study itself.
Thank you, John. And good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, thank you. I will be presenting a summary of the results of a mixed methods investigation on school safety that happened in your district. There's thousands of responses and hundreds of pages of data. Today, I will show you the most salient pieces of data, but there's more data that is available if you want to see it. I am, as a way of introduction, as John mentions, I'm a technical assistance facilitator. I have published articles in scholarly journals in my capacity as a professor in qualitative research as well as quantitative research. And that was my contribution to this study, the research methodology in the school safety study. What this mixed methods design did is to collect data from 3,533 participants. That included students, parents, teachers, school staff, and community members. Additional interviews and focus groups were conducted with a selected group of those participants, and I will tell you more about it in a second. The survey, as Dr. Eiler mentioned, was very short, 5 minutes. And we developed the survey based on a review of the research literature, as well as cycles of feedback from district officials. The additional focus groups and interviews were conducted based on the responses of the participants in the survey. For example, if a participant selected that they strongly disagree with feeling safe at school, then they were invited to participate in a focus group with homogeneous participants, meaning other students that felt the same way. The results in terms of the distribution of participants, the large majority, or 45%, were parents, followed by 38% students, 15% of teachers or school staff, and a tiny percentage were community members. There were only 9 responses, so we actually dropped them from this analysis because of the small amount of participants. I'm going to talk briefly about the students who responded to the survey. The large majority were 9th graders, followed by 11th graders and 12th graders, but the large majority were 9th graders. The item that was the most salient in the survey was the statement, I feel safe at school, with the options strongly agree to strongly disagree. As you can see in the graph, the majority of students, 30% and plus 42%, are in the somewhat agree to strongly agree area.
Paul, we're not seeing your presentation yet.
Oh. I am sharing now. Are you able to see it?
No, not yet.
I believe someone else is sharing a blank. There you go. Okay, so I was presenting the graphs, and let me go back here. These were the methods that I explained, the results and the distribution of participants. 3,533, as I mentioned, the majority were parents, followed by students. And the majority of respondents were 9th graders. Are you able to see this graph? I feel safe at school. Good. Okay. So as you can see here, the majority of the students, about 72%, if you add the 30% plus the 42% of somewhat agree, are feeling safe at school, somewhat safe at school. Then we disaggregated the data by race, ethnicity to see if there were any differences. Most of them were in the range of 2.9 to 3.5 on a scale from 1 through 5. 5 meaning strongly agree, 1 meaning strongly disagree. You can see that Latinx students were the ones reporting feeling the safest, with Asian students were the ones feeling the lowest levels of safety. We also asked them to report feelings of safety via location, and the scale or the range here was 0 to 100, with higher numbers indicating higher levels of safety. You can see that the bathrooms were the lowest, had the lowest levels of safety reported by students, with the library in the classroom having reported the highest levels of safety. The item that we asked every student, do you want to have a school resource officer on campus? And we have 1,257 responses. The large majority, 57%, responded, I do not know. And that followed by yes with 29% and 13% who said no. We disaggregated the data by West and East campuses. And this was a request by the district to see if there were any differences there in perceptions about safety. And you can see that even though we have more respondents on the east side, the graph has a similar shape, meaning that there's not significant differences between those two group of campuses. Next up is faculty and staff. We have 521 responses. And for the item, I feel our school site is safe. Also on the agree to strongly agree side of the graph. Do you want to have a school resource officer on campus? 74% of faculty and staff responded yes, followed by I don't know, 16% and 8% no. Next up is parents or caregivers. We had 1,518 responses, and for the item, my child is safe at school, we have that parents are also on the strongly agree side, but you can see that the graph is moving more to the right, or to neither agree nor disagree, as opposed to the students or the faculty. The item, do you want to have a school resource officer on your child's campus? The large majority of parents said yes, 73%, followed by I do not know, 21%. We, in addition to this, we had a Spanish-speaking survey with 181 responses in Spanish. And to the item, my child's safe at school, you can see that there are significant differences with the Spanish-speaking community here, where They strongly agree and agree also, but there's the graph also moving more to the right to neither agree nor disagree, or to disagree and strongly disagree. So there's something going on with Spanish-speaking parents in terms of this item that is particular to this group. Next, I'm gonna briefly summarize the qualitative data that we collected. And for the methods, we conducted focus groups and interviews that we recorded and transcribed for analysis. We developed a code book based on the research literature. For example, bullying prevention is something that comes up as a strategy that is used with SROs. And there were two coders of the transcripts. Once we transcribed everything, we looked at it in a systematic way, applying codes. And we did a reliability test to see if both of us were applying the same labels to the same statements. This reliability test, after different training sessions, we reached 0.78, which means 78% of the times we were agreeing on the statements and the codes that were applied to the statements. These are the results of those focus groups and interviews. On the media column, you can see the students' homogeneous group of feeling unsafe. There were two groups of that in that area, and followed by two groups of students that reported feeling safe. So in the survey that responded, I strongly agree that I feel safe at school. They were invited to take part in these focus groups with students who were similar in those perceptions. On the codes, right side, you can see the labels or the codes that we applied to the statements and the number of times that that label was applied. So for example, bullying or violence prevention, that was a code that was applied to 5 statements by the parents. And negative interactions with SRO, you can see that it was applied only once with the unsafe group and 6 times with the faculty and staff. The no interactions with SRO was a common label, as well as participant definition of safety, which is the one that we coded the most, with 11 statements with unsafe group, 18 statements with the second group of unsafe group, 5, 9, 8, 7, and so on. Positive interactions with SRO, we did not code that much. As you can see, we did not find it in the transcripts or described by the participants as much, but we did find it 3 times with faculty and staff. I'm going to show you some examples of those quotes and those labels that we applied specifically to the definitions of safety. I do feel safe pretty much anywhere in the school, like classroom-wise and also the library. But the main place would probably be in like the classes of the teachers who know me and know what makes me feel comfortable or makes me feel like I'm safe where I am. This is a student that participated in a focus group that reported feeling unsafe. It's technically where you feel like you're safe around the people by not being judged, so be accepted for who you are. This is a student in the unsafe group. I feel safer in classes where the teacher has put effort into making the classroom a welcoming space, and that's more so emotionally. But I would say when there's obvious effort being made to show that this place is welcoming, be it, decorations, be it the way people are acting, be it a certain way the classroom is set up or the chairs are set up, that kind of thing. This was a student in the unsafe group. If anything ever happened, my teachers have a plan. This was a student in the safe group. You start to see the theme of teachers. This was something that was mentioned by students a lot. Teachers is what makes them feel safe. I think if the students knew that there was somebody there in their corner that they could go to in confidence and let them know of any issues that were happening, I think that would make them feel a lot safer. This was a parent. Is knowing that I have a team that has strong communications and that we work very hard to build trust with our students so that they feel welcome to approach us, whether that is dealing with academic things or specifically social emotional things, because that allows us to support our students' safety and our own safety on campus. That was a teacher. Finally, a summary of the key findings. Most parents and teachers who responded to the survey report support for having an SRO on campus. However, students mostly report, I do not know if they want the presence of an SRO, suggesting a lack of relationship or awareness between the SROs and the students. Thematic analysis from the qualitative data suggests that social emotional support, teamwork, and strong security are all contributing elements of safety. That completes my presentation. Are there any questions about the study or the data?
Yes. Hi, how are you, Dr. Lumo? This
Hi,
is Dr.
good.
Ruffin. Thank you
Hi,
so
Dr.
much.
Ruffin. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this amazing report that you and your colleague, Dr. Eller, did. It's much appreciated. I have a few questions and I would love to get a copy of your findings. What percent of the 3,533 students of that sample were African American?
What percent? There were, I don't have the exact number right now, but I can get that to you.
Okay. I think
we had a significant response from African American students, but I can get you the exact percentage.
Okay, I think that representation is definitely key. This is a primarily minoritized community with 80% minority encompassing our Latinx students and African-American students. I think it's something like 64% and then 14% African-Americans. I think that it definitely matters if we had an equivalent representation from our students given a voice to this amazing research that you guys did. That was one. And then there was a slide that you showed from the differences between the East and the West. And I could not see what those, yeah, I can't see what the labels say.
The item was, do you want to have a school resource officer on campus? That was a question. And the number of participants who responded yes, no, and I don't know. Yeah, you can see that most participants responded, I do not know.
Okay, thank you for that.
And let me go back to the actual report and show you this graph that with the percentages. Are you able to see ethnicity, gender identity?
I can see the big bold ones, but the other percentages are very small. I can see the LGBTQ, race, ethnicity, right, but the other ones are small.
Right. So I can describe it in a second. Just to let you know, we did collect demographic data on all the participants, and we have that data, those data available. When you look at race, you can see Black African American was 19.6 of the sample. And white was 36%. And I'm sorry, it's a little bit hard to read here, but I can send you the report. And other was 29%.
Okay, great, thank you. So then my other piece would be questions like, I'm so glad today there'll be other presentations on this. We're looking at, there's some data that I'm gonna address a little bit later, but it talks about the number of our students who are actually attaining their degrees. It also reports out the number of students, the graduation rate. And that's some information that I disaggregated, but I'm curious to know, of the 3,533 students, were these primarily students who were on track to graduate, or where, in which I'm finding is about a third of our students that's represented in the data that they gave us today, and about 2/3 of the population is not on an A through G pathway of graduating. So I'm wondering that portion of the data, and also, was there an equal amount of students from both sides of the community? You know, was there equal representation of participants who participated on the West side? I know many of our teachers, like for example, on on the east side live on the west side. So I'm just wondering, like, those different perspectives and how would that contribute to their responses? So if we had that data, it would be great. You don't have to tell me now. If you could just send it to me, we can have a further discussion about that. But I think that it's great that you guys dug deep in just to kind of look at those layers.
Okay, thank
Okay,
you.
and
So
then
yes,
go ahead.
I can send you some of that data. The first question about if they're taking the college path or graduation path, we did not ask that specific question in the survey. We did ask the campus, for example, school of attendance. So you have those data on where they're attending, the students and the teachers as well, and the grade level. You can see that 9th graders were the ones that were the most engaged with the survey. So these are students that haven't been to your campus. So that's an
Exactly.
interesting piece.
I was just
Yeah,
about to say
yeah.
that. It was when you were reading it, I like on my notes that I have here, I was like, wow, it's interesting that our 9th graders who haven't been with us, and if you use them as your sample for this year, they technically haven't really massaged our campus spaces because we're in a pandemic. So I was really surprised that more samples from our seniors who've had experiences with us for 4 years, or our 11th graders who had 3 years or 2. So thank you. You're so on point. Thank you. I appreciate you acknowledging that. Because when I saw 9th graders, I was like, they ain't even been here. But that's great. So I think
Dr. Ruffin, if I can,
go ahead.
if I could just add to that real quick, because I think there's a salient point there. We anticipated that being the outcome. And so the way that we designed the survey was to separate both the 9th grade responses from the 10-12, because those would be the sample that would have an experience or most likely have an experience with an SRO. And so what we found is there were more I don't know responses from the freshmen. From 10th through 12th or 10th, 11th grade, there were responses that said it was more yes than I don't know, which told us they have somewhat of a response. There's more of a willingness, if you will, to say, yes, I want an SRO. And then if we kind of triangulate that with one other area, the relationship piece in terms of asking what the relationship is like with an SRO was pretty low. So that's an area I think to lean into, that building relationships, if SROs are on campus, building into that relationship piece would be a good piece, because it didn't really show through in the survey results as being something that was well known, if you will.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eller, for clarifying that. Great work. My last question is in regards to, I know last year we had an individual come out and do a safety plan. And this is key for me because that's one of the issues I ran on with student safety. And student safety from a perspective of how safe the feelings are from our students, but also how safe our grounds are. And that was some key information that came out of a previous report that we had gotten back from Lieutenant Frank, which that report hasn't come out. But I would like to know if moving forward, would that be another area, and position is to Dr. Vieira, for your team to look at as the actual safety of our grounds in relationship to the actual emotional responses that we receive from parents and students and staff.
So I think absolutely that would be perfect, Dr. Ruffin. I think when we look in the study right here where it talks about locations on campus where students feel safer than others is perfect to look at as well. What indicates here is that they don't feel as safe in restrooms or in hallways, but they do feel safer in classrooms, libraries, and interestingly, at entrances of schools as well. So more further review of all these implications from this study.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Vieira, for bringing this up. And again, what I'm able to see on my end is like a -3 font, so I can't really see those categories. But I heard that discussion, and I know that there was more depth to Dr. Frank's data that he shared with us in regards to not exactly locations, but the ways in which we can provide safety on our grounds that wasn't so much specific to a location or, again, an emotional feeling. But thank you for bringing that information up, Dr. Vieira.
Dr. Ruffin, if I can add to that briefly. There's a report that came out, I want to say 2 to 3 years ago. The Secret Service agency actually did a study of the last 20 years of violent incidents on campuses, so shootings and stabbings and what have you. And they were looking at patterns and trends in terms of what perpetuates this. And there really wasn't a pattern that they found in terms of this is the profile of a particular student. What they did find are some commonalities around kind of some of the mental health concerns and the early warning signs. And so when we kind of address safety, and this is part of the work I mentioned earlier with Keenan and Associates, is they're obviously looking at plans and protocols and procedures that are in place if like an active shooter situation were to happen on campus. There's also a set of culture climate variables that provide a set of protective factors that are equally as important. And so engaging in something like that, a school safety study, I would encourage your leadership to look at both plant factors, if you will, but also some of the culture climate efforts. And that's been some of the conversation I've had with your cabinet, as well as the involvement of social workers and screening measures on campus and identifying kids objectively who might need supports. Those are all really good protective factors that would contribute to that overall kind of strategy around school safety.
Thank you so much. I am loving your presentation, Dr. Eller and Dr. Lumo. I mean, great work. Thank you for coming to share this with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I wanted to, if I could spend just a few more minutes, I wanted to leave you with just some parting considerations, if you will. I know the decision you have in front of you is heavy, and I want to just kind of put some thoughts out there for you. If the board decides to move forward with a contract to have law enforcement present on campuses, here's some things I would encourage you to consider. Number one, defining the role. This is something that came up in the listening circle. What is the role of SROs? Who's responsible for safety on a school campus was kind of a rhetorical question that came up in there, but I would encourage you to kind of be in a space of innovation as a district, and you define the role of that SRO and how that individual works within your tier 1 prevention strategies, not necessarily just here's an SRO on campus, right? So I would encourage you to be innovative in that space. The other thing I would consider you to do is look at metrics for monitoring the level of engagement and positive relationships with SROs. So I think there's a tendency to look at the negative effects around disparities or criminalization of behavior. I would also encourage you to look at, well, what are the positive pieces? Where are we finding solid engagement and positive relationships with SROs? I would encourage you to look at an anonymous reporting process. This came up with one of the parents that Paul shared in the summary earlier, but how do students report situations where they feel unsafe, just in general, and then specifically unsafe with regard to law enforcement? There were some negative interactions that came up in the focus groups, but I think having a mechanism for adults and students to be able to report anonymously would be helpful, and it would be a protective factor. An internal monitoring strategy for evaluating incidents, and I would say those must be disaggregated across race and ethnicity, gender, disability, foster, and what we're seeing emerge in the literature is LGBTQ populations tend to be more of an at-risk population in this space as well. So to the greatest extent that you can, I know that self-reported doesn't necessarily sit within your student information system, but a monitoring system that looks at law enforcement involvement, not just arrest, but requests for law enforcement involvement would be good to just kind of track and make sure that there's these protections in place. The last thing I would encourage you to consider is that there's an annual professional learning strategy for SROs. And some of those topics might include cultural responsiveness, restorative practices, the impact and the role of implicit bias in decision-making, trauma, and mental health. Those are some key factors that I would say should be part of your SRO strategy. Lastly, I'll end with this. If you decide not to move forward with SROs on campus, there's some things that I would encourage you to consider. One, addressing the additional security personnel on campus. I know that came up in the focus groups several times, that having people present on campus to really monitor safety was important. So if it's not an SRO, are there other personnel that you could look at? Continue investments and intentionality around the development of your tiered systems of support, specifically with your culture climate initiatives. I know you're doing a lot of work around restorative practices, the importance of relationships, social emotional learning, mental health, trauma. I'd say those are just as important in creating school safety. So even if you don't contract if you will, I would say continue to invest resources in those areas. And then again, I would still have an anonymous reporting system for processing additional threats of safety for all community members on campus. So with that, I want to kind of turn it back over to the district leadership and the board. And if there's any other further questions, I'd love to answer those for you.
Thank you very much. Board, does anyone else have any questions or comments for the team?
I just have one more comment to both Dr. Lamo and Eller. I think that it's also, very important to understand the climate in the Antelope Valley. There is a Department of Justice consent decree here that is very much rooted in systemic racism and desperate treatment toward African Americans and Latinos. And that's over this entire valley. It would be great if you guys could tap in with David Muhammad and Dr. Wolf to just kind of give some intrinsic and more depth to like really what the climate is outside of the inner school space, because the outer school space does impact the inner school space. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you. Ms. Nguyen?
Yes, I just have a question. Were you able to spend any time with our assistant superintendent, Ms. Williams, concerning safety that we do have and the protocols and the layers of safety that the district does have, especially pertaining to social and emotional well-being of our students, staff, and parents? Were you able to spend any time with them?
Yeah, I can answer that.
Thank you.
Yeah, we think we spent, I would say, hours together with not just Shannon, but your entire cabinet team around kind of crafting of the survey, what's currently in place within the school system right now. I'm somewhat familiar with your MTSS strategies because our group is providing support for your expanded leadership team in that area. So yeah, I think those were very much part of the conversation and considerations. And we reviewed a lot of these talking points and directions, suggestions that I would make to you as a board to consider moving forward. So that was very much a part of the conversation.
I noticed your recommendations actually seem to lean in that direction of support for students and student staff and parents. But thank you both very much for your report. I really appreciated it and found it very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for your service. Ms. Rush.
I have one question. It's pretty simple here. I was having difficulty hearing. Did you say that the presence of law enforcement or SRO on campus, that there's an overall reduction of violent crime? Did you say that at the beginning of your? You did. Okay, thank you.
So I just want to clarify. There's what the research is pointing to is that there is a reduction of extreme events such as weapons on campus, assaults, rapes, some of the very extreme behaviors. There is a reduction there. With regard to student fights, kind of acts of aggression, what we call the A1 violations, if you will, with Ed Code, there isn't necessarily a lot of research that points to a reduction in that particular space. So there's a difference in terms of the types of events that we found. There is some research that points to the presence of law enforcement. There's an increase in some cases of some of those events, the fighting events on campus. So there's mixed results. And then the last piece I would put on there is that there is a perception of feeling of safety that has been reported through the literature with regard to law enforcement on campus.
And thank you again for making that clarity. Were you able to share how many of those non-A1 incidents has the Antelope Valley Union High School District experienced? So in this data finding where the data is showing that for those extreme cases of a rape, of all these other things, what is the percent that our population is engaging in that? Because most of what I've sat in on in expulsions and suspensions have been with students fighting. And if the data is showing that our kids who are fighting on campus, which most of them are Black and brown, that is not serving them to have the SROs on campus. I really want that to be clear. Because I love how you talked about the criminalization of our students. I loved how you nestled this situation in the zero tolerance and where that mentality came out of. So thank you so much for layering that. But it's very important that this community hears the differences in the ways in which our kids are being policed or criminalized, and what the data is suggesting what would warrant an SRO.
Yeah, I was trying to look up real quick. I don't have the exact numbers in terms of DataQuest is a publicly available data reporting system that would disaggregate. I think there are 6 different offense categories or incident categories with regard to suspensions. And so it would show you what percentage of your overall suspensions for the school district fall into that violent and then non-violent, aggressive and or violent and non-violent. Oh, it's violent injury and violent non-injury is how it's separated on DataQuest. So I wasn't able to pull that up fast enough, but we can certainly take.
That's okay. I trust that you'll get it to me, but I will say major kudos to Chandler Williams. You know, she was able to work with the board to be more clear when we were making decisions about who would be expelled in our district, which one of those offenses would fall into that severe versus non-severe, but still give us the discretion to have other options for these students. So that sounds like it's definitely in alignment with what you just said. So thank you so much.
Once again, I thank you from the board. Any other questions or comments?
I would just like to make a comment to Ms. Rodriguez, but just to all, Dr. Wellman and John, for the time and effort that you put in for this study. I know it's been a lot of work, a lot of conversations, a lot of going back and forth, but great job, and we appreciate it, and a lot of information to process, and I think it'll serve a good purpose. So again, thank you for your time and efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, finally, one last thank you. We appreciate so much all your work, and we're going to move forward on our agenda. Thank you, gentlemen. Next, we are conducting a public hearing for the PINCO operations budget. It is 10:50. We will open the public hearing at 10:50. The board is asked to conduct a public hearing with regard to the PINCO 2021-22 operations budget as presented. Any comments?
Yes, thank you very much. PINCO operates as a business JPA enterprise, so therefore all of their revenues and expenditures are equal throughout the year. So for food and administrative costs for each of the member districts, they're allocated out to each district based on a percentage and the amount of food they purchase. So therefore PINCO maintains a balanced budget. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions?
I don't have a question. I just simply have a comment. First of all, I'd like to thank Yvonne Stubbings. This is a lot of work. My comment is this is a much thicker budget presentation than when I was on the board previously. So I can only imagine that it takes a considerable amount of time to put something like this together. So if you'll please pass that along, I'd appreciate it.
I will. Our legislators have increased the requirements for budgets, and our own district budget as well is much longer than they used to be, but I will pass that on.
Thank you.
Do you have any comments from the public?
Not on this item.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Okay, we will close the meeting at 10:51. The board, the adoption of the budget of the 2021-22 budget. The board is asked to conduct a public hearing with regards to the 2021-22 Antelope Valley Union High School District budget. We will open the hearing at 10:52. Comments from staff and board. Mr. Hawkins.
Good morning once again. I have a presentation on our budget for this year. I would like to start with and apologize for not getting this to the board sooner, but with everything we've had going on, I just finished the final tweaking of this presentation this morning. And I can assure you, we will email a copy to each board member after this board meeting. Once again, we want to just take a quick look at our budget cycle. As you can see, we are here at the adopted budget portion. So we're looking at next year's budget that starts on July 1st. The budget we're asking the board to approve is based on the May revise that the governor came out with just about a month ago. So we know that currently the state legislature has already made recommendations that have several changes in it from what the governor initially proposed. And a few of these changes are significant that could really help school districts. Most important point here is that we are filing a positive budget for this next school year. Kind of wanted to go over and just show what the major Proposition 98 from a long time ago, that's what provides the basic funding for all school districts. So this year, the governor proposed for ongoing funds, a $3.2 billion LCFF, what they call a super COLA. So that means the governor has provided, and as far as I can tell, the legislature has agreed that we'll have a COLA next year of 5.07. That's considerably larger than we have seen in many, many years. There is an additional 1.1 billion for concentration grants. That's for our targeted funding. And then another $1 billion for the K-6. That doesn't help us, but it is for the K-6 school districts. He is adding in what we call one-time funds. So he's looking to pay down the deferrals. If you remember, we had to do a trans last year because the state deferred our monthly apportionments. They're looking to pay all of those deferrals back in the current year, which is excellent. Now, we will get the deferral money, but then we have to turn right around and pay back the loan, the trans, which was $47 million, I believe, is what we borrowed. Then there's $3 billion for the community schools, 2.8 for education, for the education workforce proposals, and then $2 billion in health and safety. So in essence, there's about $4.3 billion that benefits our school district as a proportion. And then the governor has about $16 billion in general one-time expenditures that they're looking for. When we look at school funding, we are paid on ADA. That is students in the seats every single day. This next year, the governor's proposed two ways, which is our students in the seats, because the distance learning, all of that legislation and all of the directives they put out last year for this past school year, that those statutes all expire at the end of this month. So moving forward, we'll have basically two ways. One is students in the seats, our traditional ADA, and then second, the governor has allowed for some distance learning because he knows some parents, some students are not going to feel comfortable returning because of COVID. And they're trying to put that into our independent study program, which is putting a square peg into a round hole. And so they are working on, the legislature and the governor are working on how to exactly define, because the independent study proposal currently says we would have daily interaction with students. Our independent study program works on a once a week program. So we're working through that, and we'll have to just see how the legislature and the governor finalize this. And it always shows up in the trailer bills, which could be as late as mid-July when they finally get some of those things worked out. Looking at our total district revenues for this next year, our LCFF fund will be about $304.6 million. Then looking at our other funds, my point is here is that we're looking at about a $335 million budget. And every one of those dollars goes through the business services department somehow, whether it's through payroll, purchasing, or making payments on for contracts. This 334 does not include the most recent ESSER 3, which the Congress passed back in March. Those dollars have not even been apportioned out by the state yet. So we have a lot of money that has been apportioned and some that has not. What we've actually received is a whole lot less, as the state is slowly apportioning these out. I want to take a look and just show on our average daily attendance. Last year we got paid on the prior year. Our prior year, back in 1920, we had 19,667 students for our ADA. So that rolled forward into last year. And then this number becomes the starting point for our new budget that starts on July 1st. Now, we did see about a 400 student increase this past year, but I'm not going to bank on that or budget for it till we actually see the students in the seats, basically here, because it's unclear right now what we're going to expect, how many students are going to show up, how many may want to take advantage of a in-home or distance learning procedure. So for right now, we're conservatively budgeting on the number that we know the minimum is that we would receive. As we look at our LCFF funding, we want to break it down. And so we can see that our adjusted base grant will receive 197 million. Our supplemental concentration will be about 45 million. And then we have a small home to school and targeted instructional improvement grants. That's about 1.9 million. The base grant is designed to pay for the basic educational requirements for all school districts. Supplemental concentration grants are designed to provide the enhanced educational opportunities for all students. So that's where we use a lot of our targeted funds for. This number is based on what we call the unduplicated student count. So it covers both homeless, foster, English learners, and those students that receive free or reduced lunch. Well, the student can only be counted once. So that's why it's unduplicated. So you may have a student that qualifies on all 4 of those areas, but we still only count them once. So the total new dollars, when we look at the super COLA projected for the general fund LCFF, is about $12 million, which is really excellent. Of that, $2.5 million goes into targeted. So our base grant will receive about $9.5 million, which are new dollars into the system for the COLA. When we look at what our major cost increases are, we're looking at pension cost increases right now based on the information we had up to about a week ago of about 2.9 million. We'll have retiree benefit costs. That would be the difference of retirees who will fall off versus those that come on the system, and we'll adjust that by first interim to be specific, but it's averaged around $150,000. We have our step-up column. That means for each employee, if they move across, if a teacher gets additional education, they may move across on the columns, and or additional service time, they may move down on that. Our district, we've averaged about almost 1.9 million in the total. I won't have the final on that until first interim, because teachers, they don't have to tell us the education that they've received until like August. So I'm budgeting on the averages. And our special education costs increased with both staffing and general costs, and we're budgeting about 3.3 million. So out of that 9.5 new, we're going to have about 8.3 million in expenditures that we're budgeting for at this time. When we look at where we spend our funding, where we in our general fund combined, that's the restricted and the unrestricted, we spend about 73% total dollars on salary and benefits for staff, about 7% books, supplies, services 19%, equipment about 1%, and then other is some capital expenditure type items, and that's all less than 1%. What is when we look at the state in the federal dollars, the extra we're getting for COVID, whether it be, and there's lots of programs, whether it's the ESSER, whether it's the GEAR, or 2 or 3 others, the ELO or the IPI, those kind of distort some of our spending because each one of those programs focuses on some slightly different areas. So both the revenue and the expenditures get distorted a little bit throughout the system because we have all of this one-time, what I call free money, but it's one-time funds. If we look at our unrestricted balance as we move forward, we're looking right now, we're looking at the far right-hand column, in the bold, in the black bold. And for that, we're estimating that we'll have about $6.3 million positive ending balance for next year. Now that's anticipating leveraging a lot of the state and federal funds coming in, that we can leverage those dollars and not have to spend them on other items. So looking at leveraging that, we are providing a positive ending balance at this point. When we look at our projection for what we call our multi-year, we have to project this out. We have the federal and state additional funds for the next 2 years. And so we're projecting out a positive ending balance for all 3 years when we look at our multi-year projection. If we look at some of the challenges we have right now, our CalSTRS and our CalPERS, CalSTRS is anticipated to increase 1% over last year. CalPERS is looking at increasing about 2% over last year. And those are some significant dollars. The good thing is the state legislature in their education budget has allocated funds to buy down the increase for the next couple of years. Exactly how that will impact us until they actually get a dollar number and the budget is signed, can we then extrapolate what the actual assistance would be for us to reduce our overall cost. One of the biggest shocks we had was the California State Unemployment Insurance. Past years, the general fund has paid about $77,000 for 0.05% of salaries. The unemployment or the EDD department increased the rate for this next year from 0.05 to 1.23. That changes our $77,000. It goes up by 24 times to 1.8 million for unemployment insurance. And the ironic piece is that schools were prohibited from laying off staff last year. So why are we paying a significant increase when we didn't have a lot of unemployment? That's the numbers we have. Fortunately, here again, the state legislature has adopted for their education budget a 0.5% cost. So to go from 1.23 to 0.5, we were at 0.05. So that would make a significant reduction in that 1.8 million. But as of today, none of that's been decided. So those costs are put into the budget for next year as well. Just real quick to look at other non-education items that the governor has for spending priorities, whether it's a Golden State stimulus, some tax refunds, and that's because of prior code in what they call the GAN limit. I bring the GAN limit to you every December, and that does have the limit on the growth of government. The governor is looking to add in for some housing affordability, some homelessness, modernize some of the California transportation system, and I think all the potholes we would love that. Expand some of the broadband infrastructure, some funding for climate change. So when the governor is proposing his budget, remember there's about $60 billion here that is all one time, that is non-educational. Just to reiterate some of the major issues that were not in the governor's budget, and it comes back to the CalSTRS, CalPERS. He had nothing in there for the May revise. So in our budget, I can't include anything yet. Same thing for the unemployment insurance. I can't reduce our cost until we know exactly what it is. And the full repayment of the deferrals, the governor initially only wanted to do all but one deferral of about $2.5 billion. So with that, I'd like to look just down the road quickly. There's a couple of things. The May revision gives educational agencies, all school districts, some reason to celebrate, because this is quite good news when we look at a COLA at over 5%, and the fact that we have so much one-time spending from the federal government and the state government. This is an aggressive budget, and there's a lot more ongoing obligations out there. And we have kind of a blind corner in our economy, meaning that there aren't any statistical models that economists can use to predict what is the economy going to look like when we come out of a pandemic. It just doesn't exist. You could go back maybe 80, 90 years and look at stuff from the early 1920s, some of that, but it really doesn't compare to today. So we kind of have a blind corner there. As of right now, when we look at all of the funding that the district is expected to receive, we're looking in the neighborhood of $132 million in COVID funds between the state and the federal government. Right now, we've received about $23 million. Each one of those different funds that they have different spending restrictions on them. The good thing is we have 2 to 3 years to spend that funding, so it's not an immediate need. We can use this over several years. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. Comments from the public? My comments, comments from the board, comments or questions?
I do have a couple of questions. On your total district revenues for 21-22, what were I know you probably don't have the exact number, but just approximately what were the total revenues for last year?
I want to say in the 290 range, I believe.
And I should have probably asked you these questions before.
The larger increase has to do with the federal and state funding that we have received so far of about 23 million.
And when do you think that the high school district will receive the rest of the money that the COVID-related funds are portioned?
I suspect the state will apportion it out over the next 12 to 18 months. They have not tended to just send us a large check and say, here you go. They tend to apportion it out. So it could be anywhere from 12 to 18 months.
Oh, and then at our next meeting, you're going to present the budget to us, right?
No, this is the
This is
presentation for the budget.
And so then we'll approve it?
Yes, the next
So I have
meeting.
a little bit of time to ask you some questions.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Mr. Hawkins, this is Dr. Ruffin. Thank you so much for your presentation. I just wanted to confer. I see the hard work you've been doing. I had an opportunity to sit with you and pass out diplomas at one of our schools at Little Rock. So I knew you were grinding. And thank you so much for some of the explanations that you shared with the side conversation that we had at that graduation. My question about the current budget is, do we predict, I was reading something earlier this morning with the influx with the housing market. Do we predict that may or could possibly have an impact on our ADA moving forward? And if it did, if persons within our community, this is predominantly middle class, working class community, the Antelope Valley, was to be impacted in that way, is there any information in regards to a dip in ADA that we could experience, or are you not seeing that?
Right now, looking at development and the housing, it's hard to tell. I'm not sure I'm seeing a dip in the ADA, but it's going to be truly reflective on how many students actually return to campus next year. We had that 400 student increase. we hope they'll come back. As it relates to housing, we get developer fees from those housing, and we have put in place a couple of joint community facility districts, and I'm looking to put another one in that becomes advantageous for the high school district. As those houses build out, there's a old OPSC, Office of Public School Construction, percentage, and that the high school district gets about 0.2, that's actually 0.17 of a student for every home built. So for every 5 houses that come in, we would average 1 new student.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Okay, hearing none, we will close the open meeting.
Thank you very much.
Oh, yes. At 11:13. Moving forward, we are at Education Services, present the local indicator data to the California School Dashboard for the Antelope Valley Union High School District. Dr. Kelly.
Dr. Vieira, will we get a copy of this presentation as well?
Yes, you will. And you also get the copy from the study, the school safety studies that on today.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Good morning, Board and Cabinet. I'm excited to share with you about the local indicators. Just as a reminder, the California School Dashboard, which has been suspended from Senate Bill 98, is one of the primary ways that we are held accountable to serving our communities and our students. And so there are 2 types of indicators. There's state indicators, which might be your graduation rate, your suspension rate, your academic performance, etc. But then there's other indicators that are called local indicators. And you'll see those in the blue box here on this screen. Basics, implementation of academic standards, parent-family engagement, local climate survey, and access to broad courses of study. So as I dive into this, there's areas where I'll go deep and there's areas that I'll go across the surface. And so if you want me to go into any depth on any of them, feel free to slow me down. And then
Dr. Kelly, 1 second. Thank you so much for your presentation. Are you sharing your screen now? Because the screen that's still up is from Mr. Hawkins.
Try to do
Stop
this.
sharing and
Can you see it now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so and then from a process perspective, many of these items, we get a template from the CDE where principals, vice principals, teachers, students may participate in coming up with fulfilling those rubrics. Okay, this may seem odd too because of the pandemic. Typically, you would receive this dashboard local indicators update in November. And because everything got realigned, they wanted us to go ahead and start filling this out. In fact, there wasn't even a template. We just had to go to the old slides and then just enter the information that way to be presented to you before July 1st with the LCAP, because much of the decisions we make in the LCAP comes from data such as the local indicators. And so that's being presented to you today, but then it won't actually go live into the dashboard until November. In basics, instructional materials, and here's the other thing, I'll start with the good news at the beginning. For these standards, it's either standard met, standard not met, or standard not met for 2 or more years. For all of our indicators, we met the criteria of standard met. And so for basics, that's your Williams findings, your appropriately credentialed teachers. You'll see that we only had 8 misassignments of EL teachers, 18 total misassignments of teachers, and 14 teacher vacancies, with 0 reports through Williams of textbooks or facilities. The next one is the implementation of academic standards. And again, this is a 5-point rubric that we involve teachers, department chairs, instructional partners, and administrators to go through and rate how we're progressing on these academic standards. And so in terms of professional development, again, 1 is low, 5 is high. The consensus was in terms of English, math, history, ELD, and science was at a 4, which is a full implementation. For instructional materials, you'll see a bunch of other 4s. You'll see a 3 for next generation science standards. But as you guys know, you just approved the adoption for the new science standards. And so we believe that number will go up higher, but we're still in their initial phase. For policy and program support, again, 4s across the board. And then for other standards like health, CTE, PE, world languages, and VAPA, also at levels of 4. For school leadership, levels of 4, and so that's that standard. For parent and family engagement, same thing. For people who interact with families, they ultimately participated in determining what level of implementation we met here. And again, we did meet the standard met criteria. And as you go through here, there's areas where we're fully implemented or we're just beginning. But I'll read you the summaries at the end because it kind of tells the story of the whole thing. It says that we've made great progress in building partnerships for student outcomes through PD, parent workshops, and tutoring programs. One of the areas that, based upon the feedback we got that we can improve upon, is balancing a welcoming environment that still adheres to the rules and regulations passed on to the district from the Department of Public Health. So in terms of engaging families, there's some things that we can do and there's some things that we can't do, and that was acknowledged in the outreach. In terms of this next area, the district has several areas where relationships with families are successful, including our DLAC. I think our largest DLAC meeting had something like 85 parents participating through a Zoom meeting. And what's unique about our DLAC is we have the parents actually run the meeting and our folks are just there to support them. So very successful with that. An area of improvement, maybe in transportation of families to our schools and events. We made great progress on this front in hosting virtual meetings, but once things come back to normal, that's something that we may need to consider because a lot easier to get on a phone call than it is to get in the car and then to come on. Right here, the district does an adequate job of seeking input for decision-making. This is evident through surveys, back to school nights, and other family meetings that take place at our campuses and virtually. An area for continued improvement is building capacity of parents to make informed input into decision-making. So as we're asking for help, sometimes it may be a completely foreign idea. And so we can continue to improve in letting them know the data in a digestible way so that they can provide meaningful input. And then the local climate survey. And so there's a lot of data, a lot of it's trending positive. So what they have us do here is report out the data, and then what does it mean? And so I'm going to share with you what it means. Because surprisingly, during a pandemic, most of our metrics went up. I think that's because relationships have been established. I think we responded really quickly. We had the technology in place, but there were some areas that kind of went down. And so let me see if I can move this. Okay. So the data revealed some similarities from the year before, as well as some differences. There's growth in school pride, caring relationships, school safety, school cleanliness, access to technology, and connectedness. However, we saw a decrease in participation and a minor decrease in high expectations. Much of these statistical variances can be attributed to the environment during COVID-19 pandemic. Technology was available to everyone, and the need to communicate through email and virtually made communication easier and more predictable, right? You know that you have a Zoom meeting or a Google Meets at 7:30, at 9, etc. However, students were not as connected to their schools as they had in the past, mostly due to lockdowns, right? You feel more connected when you're in that environment and in that audience. And so even that, as students started to come back on campus, got better and better and better, and even culminated last week in the graduation ceremonies that we participated in. But there was an area early on where it wasn't as high as usual. It was still high, but not as high as usual. Let's see, and then the last part, there was, in terms of high expectations, some of the students were unsure what the expectations of them were because it's kind of difficult to see in that virtual environment because you're just communicating across the screen. So principals, vice principals, teacher leaders, all were given this data. This is the district's level. It's also been disaggregated at the school level so that they can put those in their single plans for school improvement. And then the last part is pretty standard. It's access to a broad course of study. This is going to be an A through G track that we provide services for students with exceptional needs and English learners. And across the board, we continue to provide that just as the students come in. The key difference being we helped to provide that more this year than any other year through the use of technology, because that was the primary means of communicating. So that's where we're at with the local indicators. Again, it won't go live onto the dashboard until November, but this is an area where we met the standard for all areas.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Any comments or questions from the board?
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Kelly. I really appreciate this presentation. It is beyond timely. I was having a discussion with a few parent groups and educators a few weeks ago about the status of this, and I briefly talked about this with Dr. Tucker, a VP over at Little Rock High School as well. You know, a few of the things that I ran on was student access and achievement, the impact of high school guidance on high school completion, and being able to bridge the learning development and communication to impact our achievement gaps with parents, student, and community in the district. And with going over this report, I believe that I spoke to some of these issues a few months ago when we were given this information and the status update of each one of our schools. I was really happy that you mentioned the quality of our standards. And this is really where my angle is coming from. So I had an opportunity to look at our graduation rates. It was from 82.5% and it went down to 79.3%. I wasn't really sure of what that number was based off of. Was there a shift in that because we're looking at students who go through the 9th through the 12th grade and graduate at their expected year, or if those were students and the dip was because of our 5th year seniors. So that was one. And then when I looked at our A through G rates, it said that we went from 40.6% to 34.2%. And so I looked at the sheets that you provided us, and I saw from the year 16-17, we were at 36.5%. In 2017-18, we dipped to 33.8%. That was a 2.7%. And all of that was before I got on this board. Then I looked at the data shared for the 2018-2019 year, and the goal, this is going back to the quality of us meeting our standards. The goal was for us to jump 1%, of which we were successful. I'm concerned that when you shared the numbers of the 34.8% from the school year 2018-2019, we had 4,000, well, this is the information that's provided in this report, 4,057 high school graduates. And of those, 1,387 are meeting A through G requirements. That's about a third of our graduating class. So I believe it's fair to say 2 out of 3 of our graduating seniors are not on an A through G path. And the reason why that concerns me is because I'm more concerned about the systematic barrier. You know, if we're proclaiming to be a high school district that is promoting, you know, college access beyond college. And, you know, I had a teacher in this district tell me that it was okay for our kids to just aim for community college because that's what he had done. But if we're not giving our students the opportunity to, like you just said, have high expectations because systematically we're not offering those type of classes for them, I'm not sure how much of that rhetoric is true that we're building that type of population. I will say, I like the fact that our kids are graduating, but I'm more concerned about our kids being able to graduate and not have a rubber diploma, but have a diploma that is actually going to give them a pathway to change economic barriers within their families, to be able to get out of high school and work if they wanted to, not necessarily be forced into a community college, because this is what the data showed me here. So I'm trying to see, when we have provided all of this support, you know, $1.17 million in refunds, we have given a raise to all of our teachers. We have supported student mental health, but at some point, this board is going to have to look at the systemic process of what we are not doing to make sure that we're allowing these marginalized students, because that 2.2 out of 3 that are not on the A through G path. So that means even if they wanted to go to college, something's going on with our curriculum where they're not being offered those A through G classes so that they can even apply. And this is a national issue as well. It's not just the Antelope Valley that has this concern. So I would like to hear if there's any feedback on how are we addressing this A through G support, and kudos to us for meeting the 1-point jump, but are we going to have higher expectations in the quality of meeting our standards? Because I didn't see any data for the 2019, 2020, as far as us moving up on that scale.
Dr. Ruffin, I think you're referring to data that's going to be part of a later presentation with the LCAP that goes more into depth with grad rate and A through G rate. This presentation is just for the local indicators. And so I can answer more of those questions when I do that presentation. They're included in the numbers that you referenced.
Great. The local indicators impact our A through G. Thank you.
So let's move on to E. Thank you. Present the local indicator data to the California School Dashboard for AAV.
Yeah, and so it's essentially the same thing, just on a much smaller scale. They actually were a little bit more equipped because they had already had the one-to-one technology, and because a majority of the students are middle school, there had already been relationships built because they have the same teachers in 7th grade as they do in 8th grade and vice versa. So, and every standard will be individual.
And I assume, as in the other one, we'll have more information as you're presenting the next presentation.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. We'll move forward to F in the public hearing. Open, conduct, and close public hearing to allow the public comment regarding adoption of 2021-22 Local Control and Accountability Plan, LCAP, for the Antelope Valley Union High School District. The Board of Trustees is asking to conduct a public hearing regarding the proposed Local Control Accountability Plan, LCAP, for the Antelope Valley Union High School District. They'll open the public hearing at 11:30. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge some of the folks that have made this presentation possible. If I did not give kudos to Trixie, who's here behind me, I mean, she is just working her tail off and has provided such a benefit to the district, as well as Julie Vela, our principals, our district staff, and our site leadership. The LCAP is really just a plan that is a culmination of all of our efforts, and I'm just the person that stands up here and gets presented. So definitely want to make sure that those folks get acknowledged, because they had spent many sleepless nights, including last night, in order to try to get this thing done. So some things that are different about this LCAP, because last year, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, they suspended having an LCAP. And so the last LCAP we actually had was from 2019-2020. And what you remember is we had a learning continuity plan in the duration. And so this new LCAP begins with an annual update. But what it is it's an annual update from 1920 LCAP and from the 2021 LCP. And essentially, when you read that 210-page document, it's what went well, what was a struggle, how's it going to influence your LCAP. And so multiple groups looked at this in order to fill that section out. And then here's some data. They want us to address our successes and some areas of improvement that we need to improve. And so what you'll see here is the last time that our students took the CASP, these are juniors, on the ELA, the students who met or exceeded the standard was 38.62%. Since COVID, the legislation has allowed us to use a comparable test, which I'll get into more depth later, called the MAP test from NWEA. And it assesses the same types of standards to give us the same kind of results, but actually gives us more meaningful data to help teachers make adjustments. And so you'll see that on the same standards, juniors, they scored high or high average at 43%. So a lot of folks thought, and Mr. Meehan and I have tried to change some of the terminology, learning loss, learning loss, learning loss. A lot of our kids didn't lose learning. They actually excelled, especially in some of these academic areas. And so that's one of the things that we saw in ELA. Math, same kind of scenario, but we tripled in how much better we did. And so who knows the reason why? Maybe it's easier to understand or stay focused the way that we do it online, but that was an area where we went from 12.37%, which is, math has always been a struggle for us, to 39%. So that was exciting. The other thing was our AP pass rate the year before last was 27.3%. And then last year it was 35.3%. So not only was it our highest ever pass rate for advanced placement, but it's the most passed tests as well. And then finally, our suspension rate went down from 8.3 to 5.7. And so it's hard to, with any of this, and the advice that we got from CDE and from the county is do your best, because there's so many data points. Like, would we have continued our progress with suspensions even though no kids were on campus? And so we can project that we would have, but just simply report the data that we do have. And so these are some areas where, oddly enough, ELA and math and suspension, we've struggled with. And so during this time, we actually took some steps up. Areas that need improvement. So before the COVID pandemic, we had a DNF rate of 27%. Through the pandemic, it jumped up to 33%. Our grad rate was 82.5% and went down to 79.3%. And again, that's post-COVID. A through G rate was 40.6%. Again, the highest that our district's ever had, and we're very proud of it. There was a time where we couldn't break 30, but then it dipped down to 34.2%. And then finally, the college career indicator was 27.5 before the pandemic and 23.8 post-pandemic. One thing that I would state, and it's in the LCAP as well, everything that involves senior data is kind of muddy, because our district, along with many other districts, for last year's seniors, we didn't give them an F, right? They took a non-grade. And so there are students who just haven't graduated yet. And so once they come out with that fifth year grad data, we're projecting that that's going to be a very high number, because we've provided a lot of supplemental instruction and credit retrieval. But same thing with A through G, that the reporting times are solid. They don't waver at all. But some kids, because of COVID, just didn't finish yet. And so, but we also want to be transparent. This is what the number says, it's what the number says. But I'd also go back to every single LCAP we've done. Our grad rate, A through G rate, college career are usually our high points, as evidenced even with the AP scores from before. So these are areas that we need to improve on. In terms of stakeholder engagement, there are by statute groups that we have to meet with. And so I had those meetings and the dates that we did those meetings. The DSLT is principals, other administrators, both site and district, where we go over a bunch of this kind of data. The DLAC, which I mentioned, I think we met like 8 times, but for the final approval of the LCAP, it was on May 19th. The District Parent Advisory Council was May 14th. Both unions, CSEA and AVTA, was May 18th. And then the new one was the SELPA, and so we actually met with BNA in February 23rd and May 17th. In addition to that, and again, these are some of the upsides of a pandemic, because we already have a pretty good survey game, I guess, for lack of a better term. We had over 49,000 responses from students, parents, and staff to 7 different surveys that deal with the actions and the goals within this LCAP. And so a high level of stakeholder engagement even during a pandemic. So that takes us to what are our goals. And best way that I can describe this, has anybody driven to the district office lately, right? We all got here somehow. And for some reason, the city always plans to change every road at the exact same time. And so your destination is the same place, but you get there through the circuitous route. And so I would take that metaphor and apply it to our LCAP. we had a very solid plan ready to go, and then we adjusted just like everybody else. And so our destination doesn't change, but we did have to take some turns in the road. But in talking to every group, they all agreed that our goals were solid and sound and that we needed to continue with them. But adding some things that we learned along the way. So just a reminder, we have 4 major goals dealing with college and career readiness, 21st century learning environments and activities that's at rigorous curriculum, safe and positive school climates, and building relationships with all of our stakeholders. And so the way that this LCAP looks, and you'll see it in the 210-page document, is for each goal, there's going to be metrics. And so some of those are state metrics like grad rate, A2G rate, but you'll also see like the local metrics, which I just gave you the report on, of implementation of academic standards. And so the standard there is the standard met or not met. And then we have a baseline, and sometimes that baseline is 2020, sometimes that baseline is 2021, and sometimes that baseline is 2019, all depending upon the impact that the pandemic had on it. And then the desired outcome. And the desired outcome is kind of an odd one because we're saying where we want to be in 3 years. And they don't even want to know where you want to be next year. And so in terms of dealing with our stakeholder groups, they thought that was kind of odd, but it is what it is. And so for each goal, there's a metric, the baseline, and then the expected outcome. And then here, similar to what we've had in the past, is the actions that we want to have. And an upside of this new LCAP template is it provided us a flexibility to give a generic title that includes a lot of different things. And so, and I'll give you a highlight from each one of these, because again, we're carrying on with many of our previous actions, but enhancing some of the things that we learned through COVID. And so action 5 is formative assessment. That was that NWEA MAP test. And the beauty of that is we can provide it to all of our students in both English and math, and we're going to expand to science. And this is really a formative assessment. We don't wait till the end of the year to find out where kids are at. And then we're able to put these scores into something called Data Central, which I'll get into a little bit later, so that we can help kids academically in real time with student support coordinators to set manageable goals and to succeed. Goal 2, you see a couple less metrics, but same kind of thing with desired outcomes. The key thing that I would point out here is the technology, right? Fortunately, this board has always been supportive of technology. We had the Chromebooks in hand to provide to students who needed them. And then we have the ability to backfill, and not only do that, but as we transition to a hybrid form of teaching, because some students wanted to come on campus and some students felt more safe at home, we installed over 600 Promethean boards in order to provide that. So that's going to continue to go, because we have more questions than we have answers about next year. And so we want to be prepared for both. In terms of goal 3, safe and positive school climate, again, you'll see a mixture of state indicators and a mixture of local indicators. And the things that I'll highlight here, and I'm actually going to piggyback off of Ms. Williams' presentation last time, and see how all of these things kind of fit together for one big final, hopefully positive student outcome. But it's the commitment to our student support centers, where there's an implementation of the MTSS, the multi-tiered systems of support. And so that has been an iterative process, and so we're excited for next year to go into more depth, and I'll show that to you in a little bit. Then finally, goal 4 in terms of building stakeholder relationships. The thing that I would point out is our parent gap. I tell many of you that were on the board, I think this is my 7th or 8th year, there was a time where a young VP said, hey, we should get an app. Like that's what everybody's using nowadays. And there are a lot of folks like, what's an app? Nobody's going to use an app. And so we were able to convince the folks that we need to get an app. And lo and behold, we currently have 35,799 active followers of our app, where they can get information about activities that are going on in their students' life, their attendance, their grades, and so forth. And so we're going to continue to go on with that. And so as I transition, I'm going to kind of wrap up with 2 stories that kind of define what we're going to be doing in this next year. And it harkens back, there's this book called Finding Your Why by Simon Sinek. It was on the New York Times bestseller list. And several years ago, his his right-hand man, Peter Docker, came and did a training with district leadership to come up with what is our why? What are we really about when we're at our best? And so we went through this process for quite a while and narrowed it down to this: to give our best every day so that those we serve are inspired and empowered to become their true best. And so really, a quick check-in in our head is, if we're doing something, is it inspiring or is it empowering? And if it's neither, then we're not functioning at our best. And so I wanted to pull out an inspiring example and an empowering example of things that we're doing through this LCAP. And so one, in terms of empowerment, right? How do we give students the skills that they need so that they can struggle through things well, to not get bogged down in anxiety or depression? And so, and Ms. Williams spoke to this as well with the Habitudes curriculum. So social emotional learning, while I said we made a lot of progress academically, we also know that there's students that are struggling. And you can learn some of these soft skills through sports, you can learn them through your churches, through families, but not everybody learns them the same way. And often with our teenagers, they haven't learned them yet. And so this is an empowering goal that we're going to have in terms of delivering this content to kids. So instead of saying, you don't have self-control, go to OCD or whatever, we teach them skills like, right, you did not have self-control at this moment. So what might we do to have self-control in the future, or have mutual respect? And so we've been dabbling with Habitudes. Next year, we're going all in on Habitudes. And this is just the map that they have of the competencies that they'll do by month, and then the lessons that go along with it. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to look at it. It's actually pretty cool stuff. And so we empower students in that way. And then how do we inspire? So Ms. Williams gave a presentation about our student support centers, which was really, really great. So I'm going to take that work and expand it into the folks who are running the student support centers, the student support coordinators, and what they do. And so the way that works, each of our comprehensive campuses have student support coordinators. These are certificated staff members that are in the student support center every single period of the day. And so there's two different ways that students can get to them. One is reactive, right? There can be referrals. John, you did this, you need to go to the student support center, or you might get suspended. This is an alternative to suspension. Or you might just need somebody to talk to, but it's referred to by a teacher, counselor, classified employee, administrator, etc. Then there's also a proactive way through Data Central, where we can run queries on students, whether it's attendance related, whether it's academic related, whether it's behavioral, and that's where you'll see that next layer, behavioral, social, emotional, academic attendance. We have the capability through Data Central, and again, it'd be remiss of me to not mention Marcy Clement, who literally created this platform. Everywhere she shows it, people want to hire her and steal her stuff. And so you can see here that there's a mechanism for setting goals, creating student cohorts, managing student data. And so that's the next thing that I'll show you is, if I'm a student support coordinator, I can pull up kids and I can see how they're doing academically, behaviorally, attendance-wise. And what I can do is create goals for them, because there's something that's stopping them, right? And so we want to dig deeper into the root causes. We don't want to presume that it's because of something. We want to actually investigate it and meet kids where they're at in an individual way. And so what the student support coordinator can do is go in and create a goal. They can email teachers so that they can be partners, right? If Greg and Brent and I share the same student, we can put on this email, hey, this is a goal that we have for this kid. Furthermore, you can set a follow-up date so that it sends your email reminder automatically. Because it's not enough just to meet with the kid and discuss it. You actually have to create that relationship and have some kind of a feedback loop. And so finally, for the student support coordinator, you can, and this one doesn't have any goals in it, but this shows you how many goals you have for your kids. How many of those kids accomplished their goals? How many of them got close to it? Were they academic goals? Were they behavior goals? Were they social emotional learning goals? So that's where, to the best of our ability, that MTSS comes to life at an individual student level through those student support coordinators at our student support centers. And so that is a massive effort that's been a collaborative between student services and ed services. And I think the number one way we're going to meet kids where they're at, because we don't want to stereotype across different groups. We want to meet kids where they're at and really help them out. So that's basically the LCAP in a nutshell. Again, it's a 210-page document. LACO gave us some more feedback, so I'm sure it's going to end up being like 250 pages, but it's just more words. It's not different actions. So at this point, I'll entertain any questions.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Kelly.
you. Thank you, Dr. Kelly. I don't know if you answered any of my questions that I asked before. That's a part of the LCAP, but I'll summarize again. I am concerned about the systematic barriers that are impeding 2/3 of our students being successful with the information that you provided. Dr. Pedro Noguera, in a lot of his presentations, emeritus out of UCLA, dean currently of USC, when he does his presentations, one of the things that I like when he's showing us a visual of barriers, sometimes you have the students that are looking over the wall and they're all different sizes and they can't see because the wall is present. Then there's another image that you can see where some of the things we do as an educational system, we will provide a leverage so that everybody, no matter what their height, with whatever they need, they can see over the wall. But there's a third image. Let's just take the barrier down. Like I said before, I'm concerned about what are we doing as a board in a school district to empower, inspire our students to be on a college path if they want to attend a four-year college. We know in the state of California that the A through G requirements is a part of that process. But if 2/3 of our students are not even exposed to that, they're pretty much shackled. They're not given that option because it's not made available to them. So I would like to see us as a district take that barrier down for 2,000 plus students, if we're looking at the graduating class or the information that was provided in this report. And I did read the whole report. 4,057 high school students and only 1,387 were meeting the A through G requirements. So again, my question is, are they not meeting the A through G requirements because they're not passing those classes? Or is it a systematic issue where we're not exposing them? I know for sure that that is the case for our students taking AP courses. Not everybody is put on a track to take AP courses. And yes, the AP courses really do support our students who are able to pass it. And as you stated, we went up from 27.3% to 35.3% with 2,350 students taking it. It's wonderful for those kids who pass the AP test because, hey, when they get to college, that's a class that they don't have to take. And I recall over the summer when there was a discussion about our MOU with the Antelope Valley Community College, that in that policy, it read that we only offer the community college support to 100 students. So if we're looking at 21,000 students in this district, that's not even an equitable option for them. So I'm going back to this being a policy issue. Is it that our kids are not being successful in the A through G requirements because they're having challenges with meeting those standards, or are they not being offered those classes because it's not a part of our infrastructure?
Again, I would, if you want to talk about systematic, I would look at the last several years, to which I spoke earlier, when we were in the low 20% to A through G, all the way up to 40%. And then I explained why there's some variances for the small decrease we had during a national pandemic. And so I think if there's any systematic evidence, it would be that we're on the right trajectory and that we should focus on those positives to make sure that all those students have those options.
Right, and I explained that in my last explanation when I went through your systematic. For 16-17, we are at 36.5%. In 2017-18, we were at 33.8%. That was a dip of 2.7%. For 2018-2019, our qualitative goal was 1%, and we went to 34.8 to 34.2. So that actually was just a 0.4 plus increase because our bar was so low. So I looked at this very thoroughly, and I'm looking at from 16 to 2020. I wasn't on this board in 16, 17. I wasn't on this board in 17, 18. But when I look at 18, 19, the goal was for us to move up 1%, which we actually did not move up the whole 1%, but we did move up 0.4. So thank you for advising me to look at that. I did. And again, we have a systematic issue that we need to address. And it still hasn't been answered, but I'm going to rest because I don't think I'm going to get my answer. I am very concerned about our students being able to receive A through G courses. I know that this was something that was discussed with some of the counselors over at SOAR a few years ago, and parents in the community are talking about this as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board?
I just have one question. First of all, I want to thank you very much for your report. And I know you said there were a number of people who helped put it together. So I'm hoping that they know that the board appreciates the work that they do. I also noticed that there was a couple of pages in your presentation that weren't in the booklet that we got. Can I get those couple of pages? There was one that had the quote in it, the why.
Oh, gotcha. I got a little inspired at the last second, probably threw that in before. But yes, ma'am.
Any other comments from the board? Any comments or questions from the public? Thank you, Dr. Kelly, and thank your team for us, please. We appreciate it very much. We will close the hearing at 11:53 and move forward to the next one. The Board of Trustees is asked to conduct a public hearing regarding the proposed local control accountability plan, LCAP, for the academies of the Antelope Valley. We will open that hearing at 11:54. Okay, thank you.
Similar to the local indicators, AAB mirrors much of what we do as a district because of our commitment to them and just all the opportunities that we share together. And so they continue to make progress. Again, a majority of the students that we serve through AAB are 7th and 8th graders, and going to be 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And so some of their strengths are in academics where they don't have things like grad rate or H&G rate because they're middle schoolers. So they're making great progress. Honestly, the small school environment, I think, provides very positive feedback. Their key thing with this next LCAP is how do you implement things like a student support center when you have less of a staff and less of the facilities? But I have all the faith in Mr. Barron and his team to find the solution for that.
Thank you. Do we have any comments from the board? Any comments from the public? So hearing none, we will close the hearing at 11:55. And thank you, Jim. So moving forward on the agenda, we are from ABTA, Mr. Dan Shine.
Nothing to change, sorry.
Okay, thank you. From CSEA, Ms. Karen White.
Yes, good morning. I want to say that I have enjoyed these presentations immensely. They have been very good, and I wish the other people could have been here today to actually experience what was given today. So good morning, Board President, Ms. McGrady, board members, Dr. Vieira, Board Cabinet, Mr. Furno, and Ms. Orozco. I'll keep my comments short compared to our last meeting and only express mine and CSEA's congratulations to Elijah Johnson for his service in ICC and to our district. We wish him all the best, and I know he will be a great success with anything that he attempts. By the way, that was a great picture in the front page of Valley Press, and I know that that is one that will be able to inspire anyone who saw it. I'm glad we've been able to enjoy some of our cooler weather right now, but I know we won't have it for very long since they're forecasting the rising temperatures by this weekend. But in any case, I hope that you will all have a wonderful summer and a free moment or two before summer school opens its doors, which is right around the corner. And just one more thing, even though I know I'm a little bit early on this, but since I don't think I'll have another opportunity, we want to wish all of our gentlemen in our district families a very happy Father's Day. You know, you are the stable example for our families, our students, and the communities you serve. You are the rock we lean on and look to for support and guidance. We depend on you always being there for us. And we want you to know how valuable your presence is to each of us. So enjoy your Father's Day and get in some relaxation on that special day, if that is at all possible. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you, Ms. White. As we move forward in our agenda, we are at J, public comments from the floor for agendized items. The public is invited to address the board on any agenda item. Individual speakers are limited to 3 minutes each. Total time for public input on each item shall be limited to 20 minutes. During public comments, the board listens to concerns issues. The board may ask questions for purposes of clarification. The law prohibits the board from entering into a dialogue with the public or taking action on items not on the agenda. In-person comments will go first. Are there any comments from the public on agendized items?
There are 3 public comments for agendized item. For agenda item A, Mr. Hal Cipher.
Hello, thank you guys. This morning. So I wanted to talk about the school safety survey that was done. You know, I appreciate that the board has taken into account this survey. The problem with the survey is that only 3,000 people were surveyed. It was only done in a short amount of time. And as we see on the data that was given, it was not really disaggregated by race. There is a little bit of data that was given to all of you this morning. I think it should have been all publicly available. This should not be something that is given to all of you at a later date. This is something that should be shared publicly. If this is going to be a presentation, it should be publicly shared, all of the data. One of the data points I'm concerned about is when we talk about the need for SROs on campus, we look at the survey respondents and the disproportionality of white respondents versus respondents of color. So in the school district, there's about 11% of the district that's white. Respondents were 30%. That's a huge difference in the number of respondents. So, but that data still is not disaggregated. We don't know how that data was done. So that's one concern that I have. Another concern that I have is just overall that the data was not disaggregated. So I think one, you need to share that information with the public. It should be online somewhere if you want to put it onto the district website. It needs to be online. And 2, it needs to be clearly disaggregated, clearly in pie charts or whatever other charts that can be done. Because we can't really understand what the community is feeling. And I really do have a concern about the length of the study. A 2-month or a 1-month study is not nearly long enough to understand what the community is feeling about this. And I understand there are deadlines for approvals of budgets and things like that. But this is a serious issue. So, but I do appreciate the study that was done. I'm a resident of Lancaster. I live on the east side. That's another thing that was not disaggregated. East versus west. That's great that there some data is on that. But from what I saw, there was also no socioeconomic data that was given. So the west versus the east does not necessarily define what that data looks like. So please do share that information as we move forward. Thank you.
If I could just comment that document is public now, so if you'd like to leave either email address, we can send it to you, or we'll give you upon request. So.
The next comment from Mr. Gardner.
Greetings, folks. I hope you guys are doing all right today. I'd like to echo the gentleman, at least in regards to the disaggregation of the information by race. Oh, yes, ma'am. Apologize. I'd like to echo the previous gentleman in regards to disaggregating the data by race. I think that's very important, and I think that will tell a deeper story. I think. Also, I think Man, a whole bunch of, a lot of relevant data in the past, year, has come out and been made public in regards to Sheriff's Department. It's been sent to the board, to the LASD committee, and also to district leadership. And I think any survey without centering that data needs to be centered. When you ask these types of questions in terms of supporting SROs on campus, most of the community doesn't keep up with these issues and keep up with this data. I think it's important to understand that it's documented that our sheriffs are targeting Black people in the street, and that's documented for the last 6 or 7 years in the monitoring agreements, the harassment of the homeless, the articles that have been written by the Guardian, ACLU studies that have come out specifically in regards to the funds used to fund the sheriff being specifically earmarked for high need students, and there's no link in between the sheriffs on campus and the well-being of those students. So, I really think, man, all of this data that I sent out to everybody, there should be some kind of public discussion on this thing. The issues are just simply too huge, to ignore. I think it was Dr. Ruffin who talked about the issues with the sheriffs in the community and how that can affect the campus. I think that's very, very important. If I buy some spinach from the store and I see on the news that it's salmonella in it, I'm tossing the spinach, I'm tossing it out of my refrigerator. You dig? So I think an important, robust discussion around the conduct of the sheriffs around this community is very important, because these are them, and if their parents and their relatives in there, and it's completely obvious over the 6 years that the Sheriff's Department has.
30 seconds.
Thank you very much. It's not concerned with these issues. And I also think it's very important, as the district is putting on this equity face, we can't be partnering with people that are demonstrably in violation of those same principles in the community. So I think it's important to consider all of those things. And thank you very much.
The next comment, Mr. Green.
Ms. Ramos, I can't hear the people's names.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Green is the next.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Christian Green. I'm going to be speaking about the surveys. A couple of things for us to really think about on today is the idea of care first. I was going to say give honor, I'm thinking of the church, but to Rush, McGrady, Wynn, Vieira, and everyone that's here. Real quick, in regards to, I don't know if you guys watched what was happening yesterday with the Board of Supervisors. There was a great motion that was passed, and so I just want to reiterate a couple of things. In regards to that motion, it was presented by Supervisor Mitchell as well as Kuehl. 4 things that I'm going to leave you with is that there's a new commitment to implementing the Care First vision and reimagining school safety in LA County schools. If you do not know about this, please Google it. There is also increased data collection that's going to be taking place. There's going to be an oversight of all LA Sheriff's Department contracts with LA school districts. And that has been assigned to the Office of Inspector General to ensure transparency and accountability by LA sheriffs and the LA County schools. Lastly, it will require the sheriff to return to the Board of Supervisors for future agreements or extension amendments or extension with each school district for school services no later than 90 days in advance of each agreement, which will be reviewed prior to execution. I will say that I am kind of displeased in Dr. Vieira as well as Dr. Raul, who signed on to this letter to go against this motion. So I just want to make sure that you guys know that as a board, that you guys support was against this in regards to not in regards to not removing sheriffs from the contract, removing sheriffs from schools. The reason why I really want to bring this up to you all is the idea of care first, right? As a teacher of African American studies, as a sociologist, I do research as well. So all the presentation that he did today, awesome job, great job. But I also want us to think about, how do we really talk about race in 2021, right? We do not live in a colorblind society. I hope we don't. I believe that there are some notions that are out here that shows that we do not want to talk about race. So as a critical race theorist,
and someone that really knows how to dive into these conversations, I really want to challenge you all to think a little differently, right? So he was talking about innovation. He was talking about, really bringing some new innovative ideas in regards to restorative practice, trauma-informed, care first, right? We have to invest in resources. And when we look at this data, and when he's talking about it, we had 3,500, we had 3,533 responses, but there are 17,467 voices that were not there. Just throwing that out there. And also in regards to, there was this notion of, I don't know how to deal with sheriffs, and most of the responders were ninth graders. So there is, the data suggests that possibly because they were not there on campuses, that is the reason why they do not know. Again, I'm here, Christian Green, Council of Contract AV. You guys have a great day.
Thank you. Any other comments from agenda items?
Not on agenda items.
Okay, moving forward to K, the public is invited to address the board on any matter not on the agenda that is within the jurisdiction of the board. Individual speakers are limited to 3 minutes each, and the total time for public input shall be limited to 20 minutes. During public comments, the board listens to concerns and issues. The board may ask questions for purposes of clarification. The law prohibits the board from entering into a dialogue with the public or taking action on items not on the agenda. In-person comments shall go first. Any comments from the public on non-agendized items?
There's one comment from Mr. Stein.
So thank you all again. So at the last board meeting, and this is partially directed at Ms. Nguyen, you talked about the schools that you visited during graduation time, right?
I couldn't hear you.
Oh, sorry.
I can't hear you.
So you spoke of the schools that you visited during graduation time. I'm a resident in your district. You spoke that you went to Quartz Hill, you went to Lancaster, and you went to AV. When you spoke about AV, you struggled to say something nice about the students on that campus. You pointed out that the PBIS director on the campus is doing a great job. That's all good. I appreciate that. But when we're talking about social emotional learning, and we're talking about how we connect with our students, the fact that you couldn't come, and maybe you for whatever reason you couldn't come up with this, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. But I do think as we move forward, it's important to think about when you're publicly speaking, how you speak about the different schools in this district. Because AV often publicly is spoken about as a very negative school. It's also a school with a very low socioeconomic status and a huge number of Yale learners. So when you talk about Quartz Hill and the smiling faces there, but you don't talk about AV and the great things that the students are doing on that campus, that affects the students on that campus. And I just like to say this, I know a teacher who's on that campus, and last summer when there was a protest over Black Lives Matter, she reached out to her Black students and she said, your life matters. One of the students responded. He was very appreciative of her for saying that. He also told her she was the first ever teacher who had ever said that to him. That's a problem in this district. And I just urge all of you, once again, and this one specifically because I'm in your district, to reflect on that, think about that, and how that affects social emotional learning for our students. So thank you.
Ms. McGrady, point of clarification, please. I mentioned the schools with a smile on my face on each one of them because I actually had an opportunity to visit the campuses. I mentioned AV High School because, and I said it looks beautiful, it looks gorgeous. I could have mentioned a lot of different things about some of the schools that I visited, but chose to pick on a couple of things. In the future, I'll make sure that my explanations are more sufficient for the audience.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments?
No other comments.
Okay, thank you. Moving forward on the agenda, we are hearing from the board and the superintendent, Ms. Burrell.
Yes, I just want to thank everyone that put a lot of their work into the presentations today, and I hope everyone has a safe weekend.
Thank you, Dr. Rosen.
Yes. So I want to give a shout out to the class of 2021. We'll give a shout out to them, their parents, and their entire village, because they did it. They graduated. I want to give some special recognition to Tweety Ferguson at Desert Pathway and RX Paris. I enjoyed being out there at their school graduations. Dr. Harris and his staff enjoyed being there at Palmdale High School. Dr. Herrera at SOAR, I enjoyed spending time with their graduation. Shout out to Dr. Laird and his staff. I enjoyed being there at Knight High School's graduation. And also to Little Rock High School with Mr. Barajas, Mrs. Carlson. Congratulations on her promotion. She's going to be wonderful to our kids at Desert Pathways. Had a great talk with Dr. Tucker. These were just, and the rest of the staff. I am not surprised that Dr. Vieira supported RSOs. And thank you, Mr. Green, for giving us that information. But there is one clarification. There are 5 board members on this board, and Dr. Vieira is an employee of us. He's not a board member. So his representation and his vote is a vote as him representing the district. And if there was a vote from our board to vote on that, I wasn't even made aware that that was an option. The race issues in our district are very, very real. And I know that it's something that likes to get jaded over. Clearly, if you just look me up, I've been in the newspaper by one of the beloved news representatives, columnists in this area over 55 times. And that's disproportionate to any other board member that's ever been on this board. At the last board meeting, we had 2 presenters that came to speak about Black Student Union, and this being an effort across the district to somehow embrace Black people. I think I also mentioned at the last board meeting when we talked about curriculum, it was Chicano Latino curriculum. I'm surprised I haven't heard from the community for calling the curriculum Chicano. However, I did posture that we have some African-American studies in that, and I do understand the issues across the nation with the critical race theory, 1619 education versus 1836. But it's imperative when we have a community that's 80% minoritized, but it's pretty much ran by white folks. Dr. Vieira did not speak at that meeting, but the 2 representatives at the last board meeting spoke on his behalf. They spoke on his behalf about his feelings for the Black people in this community. They did it, but he's sitting on this board, and I have never heard any word come out of his mouth in support of the Black students. I've seen it written, and I saw last time where people presented for him, but I haven't heard him say that. But I'm also not surprised that this is not the only jaded perspective that's put out there. I failed to address this at the last board meeting, but our previous student board member was elected twice, and he just so happens to be a Caucasian young man. The first election was in question by the previous board because the ICC policy, if you just pull it and read it, says it in and of itself. You had to have been a 9th grader the year before. When our previous board member took his seat, the year before, he was an 8th grader. But I mentioned that, and because that's a jaded journalist or perspective, I became the negative perspective just for speaking the truth. So you have an 8th grader the year before, and our own policy says you had to have been a 9th grader before, and he actually took office his 9th grade year. This is the systemic issues that I like to bring up in this district and to show how, depending on who's deciding for whom, they decide and make things even outside of their own policies. So recently I asked yesterday Dr. Vieira about a legal case we're dealing with the Cook matter. And I'm hearing from people in the community that our district is offering a 2.5 settlement and SIC is only offering 5,000. And we talk about friendship relationships and whoever's making these decisions. This is one of the reasons why I haven't gone into closed session, because I want to make sure that when this information comes to me, it's not because I'm in that space and that the community is talking. There was a FPPC investigation on me about my alleged relationships with DivaCore. Guess what? It came back non-founded. There's no relationship. However, I did get dinged because I failed to turn in my paperwork on time. So as we're moving forward and we're talking about the things that are going on in this district and the ways in which we're supposed to behave, these violations of Brown Act violations by the current board making decisions. I mean, I believe that myself, Mrs. Carell, and Bob Davis were supposed to be sued by our previous council. But all of a sudden in this new contract, we've been left out, and so has our attorneys in this mitigation. So I'm so glad that I have an opportunity to be transparent with the community about what's going on. And I'm happy that there's more than one voice, more than one perspective that's really looking at what is going on behind the scenes and up close and personal with the people who are representing us in this district. Again, to the class of 2021, to all of the parents, to the teachers and staff that are busting your butts to make sure that our students are measuring up, I applaud you and I welcome you guys to have a wonderful and safe summer. Thank you.
Ms. Wynn? Yes, I just want to say congratulations to all of our senior students and our teachers and staff. It was a difficult, challenging year, and I feel that everyone put out an extra effort, did an absolutely amazing job, and thank you to our administration. Our administrators put in extra time and effort as well to make sure our students had every benefit. This was such a nice graduation. I keep telling people it was 33 graduations in 3 days. That's got to be a record. I'm hoping we don't do that again, actually. It was very hard and difficult to make it to all the graduations. I was only able to make it to one drive-through, and that was at AV High School. They had a luau drive-through, which was really kind of fun. I unfortunately have gotten rid of all of my Hawaiian type shirts, so I wasn't dressed appropriately. I thought everybody did a wonderful job though, and encouraging students and congratulating them. I was impressed. They even had Hawaiian music going. I'd like to have tried to make it to more of the drive-thrus because they were actually a lot of fun. But graduations are the best time of the year, I think, and I've missed that. And I truly thank everybody for letting me participate. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Rush.
I'd just like to thank everybody for ending the year last week on a positive note. I was at 4 different graduations at 3 different schools. It was everybody did an outstanding job. Have a great summer. We'll see you. I guess we'll see you another 4 days. But, thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to say congratulations to our graduates just across the valley. We're very proud of you and your accomplishments. I'm so thankful that we were able to have an in-person graduation this year for you, and just congratulations to you and your family. I'd like to thank all of our staff for helping create these 33 graduations across the valley, and it was quite a bit of work. It was a supreme effort by everyone, and so we thank you so much for that. Dr. Vera.
Just a quick thank you again for staff putting all that effort into the LCAT and to budget as well. I knew that it was a lot, and it took a lot of time and hours and days, so thank you for that. That's it.
Thank you. And I feel like I need to follow up with that. It's such a supreme effort on all of the presentations that we heard today that makes you realize that it does take everybody working in their area and working so specifically on the things that you have to do for the state and for all of us. And I thank all of you for the jobs that you do every day. Appreciate that. Okay, we are at M. May I have a motion to adjourn? Ms. Nguyen, thank you. A second? Thank you, Mr. Rush. Any discussion on adjournment? Having a motion and a second, we'll now take a vote. Ms. Burrell, how do you vote?
Aye.
Aye, Dr. Ruffin.
I vote yes, and please don't cut me off next time. Thank you.
Okay. If I cut you off, I apologize. Ms. Nguyen? Aye. Mr. Rush? And Ms. McGrady is an aye, so that item passes by a vote of 5-0. We will see you Monday at 10 o'clock. Thank you. Bye.